Hey guys, it's Mike here, and were the future androids really less powerful than the androids that we saw in the main timeline of Dragon Ball Z? This is a question that I've wondered ever since I read the original manga of Dragon Ball all the way back about 20 years ago for the first time. And this is something that a lot of people in this fandom have also pondered ever since the Future Trunks arc. Were the androids weaker in Trunks' timeline, or perhaps was Trunks actually mistaken? Did he base his analysis off of incomplete data? Well, what I'm going to do right now is get in depth into that, and we're going to take a look and see if that's the case. So this question of were 17 and 18 really less powerful than the original timeline and the history of Trunks timelines respectively comes down to a statement that we first hear in the manga, and I believe even the anime this is referenced, which comes from Trunks. So this actually takes place right after the fight with Vegeta, which I'll be showing momentarily. But what we see is that we have Tien asking the question and talking about just how powerful the androids are. And he says, this is the being who killed Frieza, and even he was powerless against the androids. We've got to face facts. Goku is powerful, but he's not so different from Trunks and Vegeta. We can't win, not even with Goku. Being very hopeful there, Tien. They were a little different from the androids I knew, said Trunks. Those ones weren't that terribly strong. I could put up a decent fight by myself. Which really doesn't line up with what Trunks is saying right here. Doesn't really line up with the reality of the situation that we have seen in the manga and even the anime. So I will be getting into that too, but let's go back a little bit first to before this fight and see what Trunks is actually basing his analysis off of. So, as we know, during the fight against androids 19 and 20, with 20 being Dr. Gero, Trunks shows up and he's shocked by what he's seeing. He sees the head of android 19 on the ground. He says, "Who are these androids?" And then he goes on to discover Dr. Gero and is completely taken back by what is happening and why all that's happening to begin with. After this, we know what happens. 17 and 18 are said by Gero to be woken up soon, and basically what's going to happen? Well, Vegeta, I'm a Super Saiyan. I don't need anyone's help. I could defeat these androids. We're not just going to destroy them before they could wake up. And this inevitably leads to everyone taking off after Dr. Gero's laboratory, and the good doctor, well, the evil doctor, the mad scientist, awakens 17 and 18. And it kind of makes me wonder, was 17 just standing here basically in this pod in suspended animation with his eyes open the entire time? How creepy would that be to see Dr. Gero walk past him every day and he's just giving him the cold stare of death? You know, a lot of people say that I sound like Android 17. I guess they mean Chuck Huber, but I'm not sure if I see that. Let me know down below if you think that's the case. 17 definitely is one of my favorite characters, and especially villains in the franchise. So, at this point, we all know what happens as well. Dr. Gero wakes up, he starts talking to the androids, or he wakes them up and then starts talking to them. I don't think he took a nap in between. And he ends up discussing, how they weren't really listening to his orders before, but ever since he put them away the last time, he did something to their programming or to them biologically to make them more likely to listen to him. Of course, they're not really doing so because the only reason they're faking is because they see that control in his hand. Now, eventually this leads into what we see next, which is Vegeta going to actually fight against the androids, if I could pull that up momentarily. So, of course, we know what happens next. The androids, turn against Dr. Gero. They kill him. Then Trunks freaks out. No! And he blasts them, and it does nothing except blow up the top part of the lab. They waken 16, and then, they fly away, but not before Vegeta feels like, hey, I shouldn't be ignored. I know what I'm talking about, and I could totally fight these guys, even despite the fact that Trunks, from the future, keeps telling him he can't. But I guess Trunks was wrong about a lot of things. So Vegeta shows some great parentage right here, punches him in the gut, flies off to take them on, and we know what happens. Vegeta, he puts up what seems like a pretty good fight against Android 18 at first. Rip that truck driver. And, they fight, but Android 18, well, she is either holding back at this point, which is going to become a big factor in this video shortly, or she just wears him down so much because of the fact, as we could see right here, Piccolo says, the android's slowly wearing him down. It never loses any power, but Vegeta loses stamina with every move, which is really the biggest significant power the androids have, that infinite energy reactor. And eventually, of course, they beat everyone, they fly off, and what do we see after this? This is when Vegeta talks about, well, he doesn't really talk. He just flies off and sulks, so he can regain his power or something. Gain a new ability, and we eventually see how that entails. But this is where Trunks says, those ones weren't terribly strong. I put up a decent fight by myself. So this is the idea where we get this idea that Trunks says that his androids are more powerful in this version, in the main timeline, compared to the ones from his future. So is this reality? What's the evidence for this? Well, of course, we have the most obvious evidence, which is that Toriyama wrote Trunks to say this, which is maybe to up the ante a little bit in terms of the narrative aspect of the series, which is to say that, 17 and 18 actually are more powerful in the present because Toriyama said so. But usually whenever Toriyama writes something, if he doesn't want the narrative or what somebody's saying to be said to be 100% factual, he will do things later on to contradict what that character said, or he will do something later on to contradict what he, the narrator, said. So, is there examples of that in universe? There definitely are, so let's get into that right now. So the first most obvious place that we could look is Trunks' backstory itself in the manga, which is Trunks' story, as many people now call it, the history of Trunks based upon the anime adaptation of it. But as we know during this, we see that Gohan goes off to fight the androids in a fit of rage because he can't take to see them destroying cities anymore. And at that point, he goes in, he flies, he attacks Android 17, kicks him right through some debris, and then proceeds to go on to fight them. At this point, we get some interesting statements, which I've also referenced in other videos in the past, so you could check out on the end screen in this video. But he talks about, it's been a whole year since they last fought, and I'm amazed you escaped alive after all that. That's referring to the battle that they had previously fought, where Gohan lost his arm and wasn't able to regrow it because the sensu beans not existing, and basically everyone who could heal just being dead at that point. So at that point, we see that Gohan says, I've been training hard. You won't beat me this time. Your turn to lose. And at this point, 17 kind of injects some reality into the situation. Sorry to disappoint, but I didn't even use half my power last time. So what is this referencing right here? Basically, 17 is saying up until this point, he's been massively holding back against Gohan, but he won't do it this time. This is what leads to Gohan being killed off and us leading to that iconic moment where Trunks finds his body on the ground and sees him dead and rages out, and in the anime version becomes a Super Saiyan for the first time. However, in this version, Trunks already was a Super Saiyan from the very start. But on that topic, let's get into Trunks right now, because Trunks would have been able to have a great idea of how powerful 17 and 18 really were if he was actually there. But the thing is, he wasn't. Gohan knocked him out before this so that he wouldn't join in because Gohan knew he was basically going on a suicide mission. So as a result, Trunks has no idea that when Gohan was killed by the androids, that 17 had never even used half his full power against Gohan in the past. Gohan likely trained to get to the level above the full power of 17 that he believed he demonstrated, but for all we know, Gohan got to like 50% or 60% of 17's power because he thought that maybe 40% or 30%, whoever knows how much it was actually his full power, and he wanted to be comfortably above him. But in this case, 17 annihilated Gohan off screen, to make it even more disrespectful. And that's because of the fact that Gohan, as you can see right here, completely shocked. He knew he was completely outmatched by the full power of 17. He was dead. And the same thing likely would be said for 18. I mean, 18 wasn't that much behind 17. We know she was more suppressed than 17 by Dr. Gero, but nonetheless, her power still would have not been significantly behind him, so she likely would have been able to annihilate Gohan or Trunks too. And that leads into what Trunks says about, he was able to put up a decent fight by himself. In the manga, we never actually get to see the fight between Trunks and the androids. As we see right here, Trunks goes off to fight them, saying that he promises that he'll return, and then he goes and fights them, becomes a Super Saiyan, he's going to avenge everyone's deaths. But then we never actually see the fight. Instead, 5 days later in a small hospital in the West City suburbs, Trunks wakes up, and he said, "You were right, the androids were still more powerful. I don't know how I made it home alive." So we've seen the power of this Trunks on display. We saw when he fought against Goku, in a little sparring match of sorts, where Goku was using his finger game to the very maximum, and Trunks was being deflected by his attacks. Even though Trunks wasn't going all out, we saw him effortlessly kill Frieza, who is more powerful as Mecha Frieza, and King Cold. But he still doesn't really know how powerful the androids are, because unless the android specifically told him, "Hey, Trunks, we're going to go full power," and somehow Trunks was able to combat them, which I highly doubt, then he was probably beaten up by the androids, who are still significantly holding back. Because as they even say earlier in this very same chapter, let's take our time. The fun we'll have will be over if we exterminate them all at once. They were leaving 17 and 18 were leaving Gohan and future Trunks alive on purpose, just to have something fun to play with. So as a result, were they really going to be going anywhere near full power against Trunks when he wasn't even as powerful likely as Goku or Vegeta after their 3 years of training? Doesn't really make any sense. So even though Trunks got utterly wrecked by Vegeta or along with Vegeta and every other Z fighter by the androids, they still don't really have any indicator to say that the future androids were weaker than the current ones, other than the fact that they probably could have just held back a lot more in the original timelines, in the future Trunks timeline, and they didn't hold back as much here. Obviously, they were fighting against multiple Super Saiyans who were significantly more powerful than they would have been in the original timeline. So why would they hold back as much? It would only increase the threat to them. So, and again, if anything, we saw the androids take more damage in this timeline with Android 18 having all her clothes destroyed than we ever saw in the original timeline. Not all of her clothes destroyed, then this would have turned into a seinen, right? But then having the entire thing destroyed, with them barely ever taking much damage at all from Gohan and Trunks. So on screen, there's never really anything we're given to indicate that the androids are actually weaker in Trunks' timeline. Even if we look at the anime, in the anime version, what we see with Gohan fighting against the androids is completely different from what we see here. He's able to fight both of them with one arm, but again, the entire fight, Trunks was knocked unconscious. So Gohan might be significantly more powerful in the anime version, or, the androids are a little bit more equalized to him, or maybe the androids themselves, weren't as powerful in the anime comparatively, but they could have just been holding back too as well. Same thing again here. Trunks was knocked out in both versions. In the anime version, though, we do get to see Trunks fight the android. So there is that difference. It doesn't just have him waking up in the hospital like this, 5 days after the fight. But again, in the anime and the manga, Trunks cannot sense the android. So unless they specifically tell him, "Hey, Trunks, we're going 100%, and this is absolute proof," and Trunks overpowers them and they can't go higher than that level of power they were putting out, there's no real in-universe way for Trunks to ever know that those androids are weaker and the ones in the main timeline are stronger. So in terms of that, what does this mean? Well, let's get into that conclusion. So overall, when it comes down to it, we do have the narrative of Toriyama writing that, Trunks says that his future androids were weaker than the main timeline androids. But in the very same story that Toriyama wrote in universe, we do not really see any concrete evidence to suggest that. When Trunks goes to the future and wipes out the androids, well, he could have done that just as easily with his level of power that he would have done it to the present timeline androids. It doesn't doesn't really have any indicator among any of the times we ever see any of these fights against the androids that one are weaker and one are much stronger. So overall in universe, I don't really think that there's any true evidence other than Trunks just saying that one time to suggest that the androids 17 and 18 are weaker in his future. If anything, they might be the exact same level of power. Maybe a theory is that because of the differences between the timelines, Dr. Dro waited even longer to wake up 17 and 18 and then suppress their power even more just to make them less of a threat against him. But again, there's no real evidence of that. There's so much that we never really see about the androids, even in the anime version, and, their backstories and how Dr. Dro made them certain levels of power anyway. That's all left up to our imagination, or Toriyama just didn't feel like showing it to us. But nonetheless, in universe, not too sure that's really the case, that 17 and 18 are actually weaker. But let me know your own thoughts down below in the comments. Make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Stick around, because there's a lot more to come in the future. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you on the next video.